Communication is a key aspect when it comes to managing employees. That's why Friedemann Schulz von Thun, Johannes Rupel and Roswitha Stratmann have dedicated a book to the subject. Kommunikationspsychologie für Führungskräfte, literally Communication Psychology for Leadership. And we will have a look at that. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and today I've got another book review for you. This book is from the series Miteinander reden Praxis from Schulz von Thun's well-known series Miteinander reden. Praxis means practical application and the title is translated Communication Psychology for Leadership. Unfortunately, this is once again a book that is not available in English. There is no English translation. So today we are able to continue two popular series on this channel because we have once again a book review and we have another video about Schulz von Thun. Speaking about Schulz von Thun, he is an old acquaintance on this channel. Let me give you a short breakdown of the most important facts. He was a professor of psychology in Hamburg in Germany, is now retired. He is in Germany a key figure when it comes to the topic of communication. He has written a couple of very popular and well-known books. The series called Miteinander reden, literally talking to each other, that has 3 to 4 volumes depending on whether you count the last one that is merely a short addendum with questions and answers. And he has created a couple of models for communication. The most well-known is his communication square. There is a video about it on the channel. The communication square is so well-known and established in Germany that it is often taught at school or at university, so it really is well-established and well-known. Schulz von Thun has founded an institute in Hamburg, the Schulz von Thun Institute for Communication, where you can visit seminars on the topic of communication. Johannes Rupel is also a psychologist. He was a communications consultant and trainer for many years, and he is part of the management team of the Schulz von Thun Institute. He manages several of their training series. For example, I visit a series regularly about communication in consulting and training, and there I usually have contact with Mr. Rupel. Roswitha Stratmann finally is also a psychologist, but she is in addition also a psychotherapist. She is a trainer and a consultant, and she is a managing director of the consulting firm Elbdialog in Hamburg. At the Schulz von Thun Institute, she is active as a trainer, so if you visit seminars there, you might encounter Miss Stratmann as your trainer. Now let's have a look at this book, Communication Psychology for Leadership. It was published in the year 2000, so it was published after the 3 main volumes of the Miteinander reden, talking to each other series. Those appeared between 1981 and 1989, so this book came after. It has about 200 pages, so it is of moderate length, and as I said before, it is from the series Miteinander reden Praxis, literally talking to each other, practical application. So what is this book about, especially in contrast to those main volumes of the Miteinander reden talking to each other series? 3 points are emphasized in the foreword. First of all, there is a clear focus on the target group of managers. Second, we have an emphasis on actual conversation, on actual practical application rather than theory. And third, the models by Schulz von Thun are combined and integrated. They are used in combination. So let's have a closer look at this book. Let's have a look at the structure and the content. The book is divided into 5 chapters of different length. Now in the following I will always use my personal translation of the title rather than giving you the original German title. I guess this will make more sense. The first chapter is called Coherent Leadership from the Perspective of Communication Psychology. This is about 20 pages long, one of the shorter chapters, and it covers the diverse requirements and challenges that people in leadership positions face in day-to-day work. They have to be employee coaches and leaders and lion tamers. They need to be subject experts. They need to take responsibility. They need to manage and so on. They are usually caught in a kind of sandwich positions where demands are made by their own superiors but also by their teams. Superiors demand professionalism and keeping the goals of the company in mind, while the team demands a people-oriented approach and safeguarding the interest of the employees. And you somehow have to do all of that. Now, what is the solution? What is the approach that is recommended by the authors? They recommend what they call a meta-communicative leadership style. The basis of this is coherence, in German Stimmigkeit, that we already know from Schulz von Thun. The basic idea of coherence is that I act in a way that is both true to myself, true to my own personality, and true to the situation I am in. I need to take both of those into account, myself and the situation, and have to base my behavior on both. Now, in addition, we get the aspect of meta-communication. We already discussed meta-communication in a separate video, so I won't go into too much detail here. Meta-communication means talking about the communication itself from a higher point of view. So after I've acted in a way that was true to myself and true to the situation, I check if the other party experienced this as was intended by me, for example, by asking my team, how do you experience the way we deal with each other, we communicate with each other? Is this how you want it to be? Is there something you would like to be done differently? So communication itself becomes the topic that we look at from a higher point of view. Now, after we know the general direction we want to go in the second chapter, we are provided with basics of communication psychology for managers. Here we are presented 5 models that Schulz von Thun developed. The communication square, vicious circles, the inner team, the square of values and development, and the situation model. There are videos about all of them on this channel, so if you would like to learn more about them, you can have a look. Again, I won't go into more detail here. So we have obtained some tools. Second chapter, by the way, is 33 pages, so also let's say medium length. The third chapter is called Competencies for Holding Conversations, and it is the longest chapter in the book with about 70 pages. Here we learn about the skills we need to acquire if we are in a leadership position for good communication. There are 4 aspects that are covered here. The first one is taking an interest, listening to the other party, listening, for example, to the employees and understanding them. Active listening is an important topic here. The second aspect is contributing. building and presenting our own point of view, becoming part of the conversation. The third aspect is leading and structuring the conversation. This is about how we set up the conversation, how we prepare for it. For example, how should we start the conversation? What is a good beginning? How should we end the conversation? What are good final steps? How should it be structured? Things like that. And finally, the fourth aspect is meta communication in the team. I already explained a bit about this, about meta communication. This is elaborated more on here. Now, after we have acquired those skills, in the fourth chapter, they are put to the test. The fourth chapter is called Manager and Employee in Conversation, and it is with 50 pages, one of the longer chapters as well. Here we have 5 examples, 5 case studies that we can apply our newfound skills to. I will give you a brief overview over the 5 cases, and later we will look at one of them in a bit more detail. The first case is about an employee who works in customer service and who tends to talk too much. He overloads and overwhelms customers with too much information, and therefore his sales don't work so well. In the second case, we have a colleague that we sometimes have to fill in for, who is very chaotic. And that is a problem for us because when we have to fill in for him, we often don't find important papers, important documents. So we want to discuss this issue with him. In the third case, we have taken on a leadership of a new team and overall things are working fine. But there is one team member we have difficulties really getting into contact with. That person even seems to evade us a bit, and we want to create a good relationship with that person. In the fourth case, there is a new employee in our team and they have just finished their trial period and everything is working fine except for one thing. This person is a bit too much of a perfectionist. They spend a lot of time on every assignment, do it as perfectly as they can, double check everything, a lot of attention to detail and so on, but we would prefer work that is a bit faster and not quite as perfect. Finally, in the last case, there is an employee who tends to be late for meetings, and that upsets us a bit because we are a stickler for punctuality and we place a lot of emphasis on that. And again, we want to discuss the issue with the employee. The final chapter of the book, the 5th chapter, is the shortest with about 10 pages, and it presents questions from practice, questions managers often ask in seminars. There is a wide range of questions. There are common objections such as, in day-to-day work, I don't have time for this kind of conversations. Or there are basic practical questions such as, should I take notes during those conversations? Is it useful to visualize topics in those conversations? So there is a wide range of questions that are answered. Next, to have a bit of a deeper insight, let's have a look at one of those case studies from the 4th chapter in a bit more detail. I've just picked the first of them, the talkative employee. As a quick reminder, this was a situation where we have an employee working in customer service who takes too much, who is an enthusiastic talker, and he overwhelms the customers with too much information. This employee is quite a good fit professionally. He has a lot of professional knowledge. He takes trainings on a regular basis. Other colleagues often ask him for advice. So overall he should be way ahead and his sales figures should be great, but actually they are below average because this issue of talking too much really hurts his sales and his relationships to the customers. Now, after this basic situation is explained, first there are two small exercises. We are asked, how would we start the conversation with this employee? How would we start it? Then we are presented with an incomplete square of values and development about qualities that are relevant for dealing with customers and giving advice to customers, and we are wanted to complete this incomplete square. I will talk a bit more about that in a moment. Now, after those exercises, we are given a resolution. We are presented with suggestions from the authors. First of all, on the topic of how to start the conversation, their advice is to get straight to the point. Don't try to beat around the bush. Don't start the conversation with doing small talk or something like that, because that might frighten the employee. This person will probably be sitting there and think, oh my God, what is this about? If they even are afraid to talk about it and to get to the point, I'm done for. And this is not what we want for a good and relaxed conversation. And another thing we should certainly avoid is to try to pass the buck, to try to make the employee start the sensitive topic. For example, by saying, oh, Mr. Whatever, if you think about your customer conversations, is there anything you think you could do better? Is there something you think might not work so well? In the hope that they might come up with the sensitive topic. No, we shouldn't do that either. That is not a good idea. After that, we get more information on how we should present this sensitive topic, this problem. And here the square of values and development that we completed before is used. Again, there is a separate video about that one, so I won't explain it in detail. Just allow me to say, if you use the square of values and development for giving feedback, an important aspect is that you appreciate the good things and the good intention that is behind the behavior before you show up the way it is exaggerated, it is taken too far. So in this example, the superior might say something like, I've noticed in your customer conversations, you make sure you take care to properly inform the customer, to enable them to take an informed decision, to make sure that they really understand what they are doing. And that is perfectly all right, and this is what I expect of you. This is fine. However, you take it a bit too far. You talk to them too long, too extensively, present too many details, and overwhelm them. Something like that. Next, there are a few more topics that are elaborated upon in regard to this specific case. First of all, the question is dealt with what to do if in this conversation there is a situation where the employee won't stop talking and we have trouble getting a word in. Here it is clearly all right to interrupt the employee, and what we should do in such a case is to use meta communication to explain how we experience the situation. For example, by saying, I'd like to tell you how I'm experiencing this situation at the moment. You have been talking for a while and it becomes more and more difficult for me to follow, to understand what you are getting at. And it's also getting a bit tiring and so on. This would be a good way to deal with this situation. Then the model of the vicious circle is used to come up with a possible explanation for this behavior of the employee. As the authors explain, the situation might work like this. The employee tries to give a good detailed explanation about the product to the customer. However, this is a bit too lengthy, too detailed for the customer, so they get bored a bit and they non-verbally signal a lack of interest. Now, this is observed by the employee. However, it is understood as, oh, they still don't get what I'm talking about. They don't understand yet. I have to make a greater effort, and they start explaining in even more detail and at even greater length, which of course makes the customer even more bored, which makes them try even harder, and so a vicious circle emerges. However, this explanation comes with an important warning. If we try to interpret and to analyze the behavior of someone, we might easily violate their privacy, we might easily go too far. So we should only take this direction if in the conversation the employee, the other person, starts to go in that direction and shows an interest into such elaborations. There is also some advice about how to structure and how to lead this conversation. For example, it is very important to stick to the main topic. In a conversation with someone who talks a lot, we might easily get distracted, wander off to other topics. This we should clearly avoid. We should make sure we always stick to the main topic. And this is the content we have for this first case study. The other case studies use other models, emphasize other aspects. There is a big variety. For example, there are some cases where we have an inner conflict. On the one hand, for example, we might be suffering because our chaotic colleague creates problems for us. So we want to change something, but on the other hand, we don't want to appear nitpicky, we want to appear tolerant, so we are torn inside, we have an inner conflict, and in such a case, the inner team is used, for example. So all the models we have learned about are used in different cases, and we have a great variety of information and of practical applications here. Finally, let's proceed to a short critique. What I really like about this book is that we have 5 models in one book here. We have a great overview. And it is also nice to have the vicious circles included and the square of values and development, because those are described in the second volume of the Talking to Each Other series. And the second volume is the one, if we look back today, that is least relevant. So it's great we can rely on this book instead of that second volume. Now there is one issue here though. The current repertoire of models that is used by Schulz von Thun and his colleagues, that is taught at the Schulz von Thun Institute, actually contains 6 models. The 5 presented here, and in addition the Riemann-Thomann model. There's also a video about that one, by the way. The Riemann-Thomann model was created by Christoph Thomann, not by Schulz von Thun itself. It is not present in this book, so we have one model missing, unfortunately. But it's still a nice book, and it is great as a workbook, as a book for practical application of the ideas by Schulz von Thun and his colleagues. A lot of practical advice for actual conversations. Now, of course, this means that we don't have a lot of theory here. The backgrounds are not explained in as much detail as they are in the Miteinander reden, in the Talking to Each Other series. However, this is clearly what is advertised, so this is perfectly fine in my book. Who is this book for? This might be a bit of a moot question since there is no English version and most of you won't be able to actually read it. But just for curiosity, I'd say it is first of all a nice book for managers, for people in leadership positions who want to get a good introduction to the topic of communication, who want to learn some basics, obtain some tools for their day-to-day work. And I think it is a nice book for those who have read and enjoyed the Miteinander reden, talking to each other series, and who would like some examples for practical applications, as long as they are fine with this context of leadership. For me personally, this book was for quite a while a bit of a knowledge gap. It was the most well-known, most popular of the books from the Schulz von Thun world that I hadn't read yet. So I'm quite happy I finally got around to it, finally got to have a look at it. By the way, in this series, Miteinander reden Praxis, talking to each other, practical application, there are a couple more interesting books that are not very well known, and maybe in the future we will have a look at some of those as well. That's it for today. Thank you for your interest. I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a nice day. See you next time.